The rap on the door was the sound of my peace dissolving rapidly, like one of those cheap fizzy tablets you drop into water, only instead of lemon-lime flavor, it was pure concentrated HOA malice. And it was exactly 7 o'clock a.m. Seriously, 7 in the morning. I dragged myself off the couch, which, for the record, is the only place one should be at 7 o'clock a.m. if one does not operate a crane or run a morning news show. I pulled on a slightly crusty t-shirt and shuffled to the door in my fuzzy dog-shaped slippers. Don't judge. They are comfortable. Standing on my welcome mat was Mrs. Peterson. I swear the woman was practically vibrating with indignation. She was wearing a crisp, beige linen suit that probably cost more than my entire retirement fund. And her hair was lacquered into a helmet so solid you could probably knock a baseball off it. She clutched a clipboard like it was the nuclear launch codes, and she pointed a perfectly manicured, trembling finger at my driveway. "Leo," she hissed, her voice low enough that it didn't violate the community's strict noise before 8 a.m. covenant, but loud enough to convey maximum disdain. "We have a problem." I squinted past her, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "We? Is this a royal we, Mrs. Peterson, or did you bring an accomplice? Because I only see you, and judging by the look on your face, the problem is about 30 feet from the door." She stiffened. "The problem, young man, is a violation of Covenant Article 4, Section B, Subsection 12. General appearance and maintenance of front-facing hardscapes. Specifically, the unsightly, irresponsible, and frankly criminal blight that is polluting your driveway." I followed her gaze. And there it was. The culprit. It was a stain. A single, solitary, modest spot of old motor oil, about the size of a dollar coin, right where my beat-up '98 Honda Civic usually parked. It wasn't dripping. It wasn't pooling. It was just there. A pea-sized monument to necessary automotive maintenance. "You mean the little smudge of Quaker State 10W30? I asked, leaning down to inspect it. "I've been meaning to get to that. My little road warrior, she's not the tightest ship, you know. Character." Mrs. Peterson's face went the shade of a fully ripe tomato, which, ironically, was probably a color she would have fined me for painting my mailbox. "Character, Mr. Dawson, is not listed in the Architectural Review Board Handbook. This is a war crime against property values. It diminishes the aesthetic integrity of the entire block." She shoved the clipboard at me. "You are hereby fined $200, effective immediately, and $200 for every subsequent day this unsightly blight remains. Failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property." $200 a day? For a spot of oil that had probably been there since the Clinton administration? Was she serious? I stared at the paperwork. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored stock, with an embossed logo of a perfectly pruned topiary. They had spent more on the paper than the projected cost of actually removing the stain. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's crazy. I can buy an industrial drum of cleaner for $40. I can't just wipe it up?" "It is a penetrating stain," she said, emphasizing the P like it was a particularly dirty word. "The concrete must be restored to its original pristine condition. You have 24 hours to begin remediation, or the penalties escalate." She then executed a perfect Olympic-level pivot, turned her back on me, and marched down my immaculate lawn, which I paid a small fortune to keep immaculate, just to spite her, and back toward her own fortress of solitude. I slammed the door, not hard enough to shatter glass, but hard enough to feel good. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the tiny, innocent stain. A tiny $200 a day stain. My internal monologue kicked into overdrive. A war crime, she called it. An actual war crime, committed by a single, pea-sized spot of Quaker State 10W30. Seriously? This wasn't just about the fine anymore. This was about the principle. This was about the absurdity of petty power. I grudgingly agreed to handle it, but the seed of ridiculous, expensive revenge had been planted right there, on my soon-to-be leaned-upon driveway. The next day, the sun rose, and the fine meter was already ticking. The first thing I did was drive my little road warrior to the hardware store. It was going to be an intense session of suburban chemical warfare. I bought every corrosive, industrial-strength cleaner on the shelf. I had bottles of purple degreaser, tubs of white crystalline magic powder, gallons of concrete etcher, and 3 different kinds of specialized stain removers. My cart looked like I was prepping to clean up a small toxic waste spill, not a single drop of old motor oil. My first attempt was the purple power degreaser. It smelled like a gym sock mixed with industrial-grade lemon, and the label warned me about 30 different kinds of burns. I poured a generous amount onto the stain. It bubbled weakly for a moment, then went silent. I scrubbed with a stiff bristle brush, sweat beading on my forehead. I scrubbed like I was trying to sand a diamond. I scrubbed until my arms felt like overcooked spaghetti. When I rinsed it, the oil stain was still there. But now it was surrounded by a slightly purple halo. Mission not accomplished. Fantastic. I didn't remove the stain. I just gave it a complimentary aesthetic accent, I muttered to myself, nearly passing out from the fumes, which were definitely strong enough to violate some other HOA covenant. Next, I went for the big guns. The concrete etcher. This stuff was serious. It required gloves, goggles, and probably a hazmat suit. I was pretty sure it could dissolve a small elephant. I carefully applied a tiny amount, foamed viciously, spitting and sizzling like a tiny dragon. I let it sit for the recommended 5 minutes. I rinsed again. The stain was still there, but the patch of concrete I had etched was now significantly whiter than the rest of the driveway. It was like the stain had sunk so deep into the porous material, it was mocking the attempts to remove it. I had inadvertently created a giant, bright white spotlight on the thing I was trying to hide. I looked down at my feet. The excess etcher had unfortunately splashed onto my favorite blue sneakers, leaving permanent, ugly, bleached spots. The sneakers had sacrificed themselves in the name of a clean driveway, and the driveway had repaid them by remaining stained. The second, more threatening HOA letter arrived on my porch exactly 24 hours after the first. It wasn't even a full page. It was a brightly colored single index card that read, "Failure to comply. Fine accumulation, $400. Immediate attention required." Section B, subsection 12. Do not ignore. I looked from the index card to the original stain, now sitting in its purple-tinged, bleached white ring of failure. The stain was winning. I decided to escalate the physical effort. I rented a massive commercial-grade pressure washer. I'm talking about one of those terrifying machines that look like they could strip paint off a battleship. The rental guy gave me a look that said, "Good luck, buddy, but you're going to lose a few fingers." I spent 4 solid hours battling the stain with 3,000 psi of pressurized water. The noise was deafening. I was soaked, splattered, and exhausted. I was so focused I thought I'd finally done it. I shut off the machine and stepped back, shaking, only to realize I had blasted off the top layer of aggregate concrete in a perfect 3-foot circle. All I had accomplished was leaving an area of concrete that was now pristine, slightly fuzzy, and concave. The stain? Oh, it was still there, sitting at the bottom of its newly created bowl, glistening smugly. The fine was accumulating. $600. The letter that came next was even nastier. It was a formal legal notice, ending with the chilling words, "Failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property to recover the outstanding balance of fines and administrative fees." I stood in the middle of my driveway, hands on my hips, staring at the oil stain and the pretentious HOA complex across the street. The tiny drop of oil had now cost me almost $1,000 in fines, chemicals, and equipment rentals. I was defeated. And then, the epiphany hit. They want perfection? They want a statement? They want my driveway to look like the surface of a pristine lunar colony? Fine. Let's make a statement they can't ignore. I couldn't remove the stain, but I could certainly cover it. I walked inside and Googled the most ridiculous, ostentatious, and technologically advanced thing you can put on a driveway. My fingers typed out the words, "Most expensive driveway coating." The results flashed up. Metallic epoxy floor coatings. And then I saw the picture. A garage floor, polished to a mirror shine, in a hue described as luxurious King Midas gold. It didn't look gold exactly, it looked like liquid, blinding wealth. It looked like the sun had melted and landed on the floor. I clicked the link. If they want a hardscape that adheres to general appearance and maintenance, then this is it. It's perfectly maintained, technologically advanced, and a non-primary color. They won't be able to touch me. The plan was financially stupid. It was legally dubious. It was, however, going to be legendary. My search for a contractor who would agree to cover a perfectly good, albeit stained, suburban driveway in reflective gold epoxy started with outright rejection. I called Pristine Concrete Solutions. The owner, who sounded like he was about 20 and chewing gum, listened to my request for a King Midas gold metallic finish on my residential driveway. There was a long silence, followed by a wheezing laugh. "Sir, we do commercial garages, hospitals. We don't do whatever that is. Good luck with your disco floor." Click. I called 3 more. One hung up. One offered me a referral to a therapist. Then I called Honest Abe's Concrete and Coatings. The phone was answered by a grizzled, gravelly voice. "Abe." "Yeah, Abe's. What you need?" "Mr. Abe, I have a residential driveway, and I need a very specific job done. I need a 2-part metallic epoxy floor coating applied, specifically in a gold or King Midas color." There was a noise on the other end, which I think was Abe spitting tobacco, followed by a suspicious cough. "You want what color? For your whole driveway? You seeing double, son? This ain't Vegas." "It's a specialty high-grade resin. Reflective. Like a mirror, but gold," I explained, trying to sound like a sophisticated buyer of custom reflective hardscapes. Abe paused. "How big's the driveway?" "Standard suburban 2-car, about 500 square feet." "And you want gold?" "Pure, unadulterated, gold-colored epoxy." A longer silence, then a slow, low chuckle that turned into a full-blown cackle. "Look, kid, I've been pouring concrete since Nam. I've done pink sidewalks and blue patios. I ain't never done gold. That material is expensive. Like, you could buy a small used car, expensive. Plus labor, plus the diamond grinding prep work. You're looking at north of 20 grand easy. You sure?" My heart did a little flutter kick. 20 grand. Double the fine. Maybe more than the down payment I put on the house. "Yes, Abe, I am absolutely sure. When can you start?" I had to put a massive deposit down right away. Abe smelled a massive payday, and his curiosity was piqued. He was in. But first, I had to source the specialty epoxy. Abe gave me the name of his supplier, who dealt exclusively in some high-end, weird request coatings. I drove an hour to a warehouse that looked like it stored alien technology. The man behind the counter, who looked like a bored chemistry professor, slid a brochure toward me. The Midas Touch series. Excellent choice. Very popular with Miami nightclub owners. Which sheen level? The maximum one. I want it to be reflective. Blinding, actually. Ah, level 5 reflectance. We call that solar flare. Needs a specific base coat and 3 separate top coats, all with UV stabilizers so it doesn't fade. And the gold metallic flakes are suspended in a high viscosity resin. We sell it in 40-gallon drums. You'll need 2 for a 500 square foot application. We went through the pricing. The cost of the 2 drums of metallic pigment, the special primer, the clear top coats, and the necessary bonding agents came to an eye-watering figure. It was financially stupid. It was legally dubious. It was, however, going to be legendary. The calculation in my head was simple. Accumulated fines, $1,000 and rising. Cost of materials and Abe's labor, $22,500. Cost of the sheer, unadulterated satisfaction of watching Mrs. Peterson's face melt off her skull. Priceless. I signed the purchase order. A few days later, a flatbed truck arrived, dropping off several massive shiny barrels on my front lawn. They were labeled with chemical warnings, complex instructions, and a sickeningly opulent golden sheen. I had officially committed to the stupidest, most expensive act of petty revenge in suburban history. The installation day was better than Christmas. Abe and his crew showed up at 6:30 a.m., not with shovels and wheelbarrows, but with high-tech grinding machines and industrial ventilation fans. The first step was prep. They used diamond grinders to effectively sand the entire driveway down to the raw concrete, removing every imperfection, every bit of grime, and yes, finally erasing that damned persistent oil stain. I watched, mesmerized, as the crew applied the specialized primer coat. It was a neutral gray, but it made the driveway look impossibly smooth. This was the foundation of my masterpiece. Then came the gold. The crew mixed the massive drums of epoxy, stirring in the metallic flakes. The mixture looked like liquid metal, heavy and thick. When they began to pour it onto the driveway, it flowed out, blinding and beautiful. The smell was intense. A sweet, chemical scent that spoke of permanence and expense. "You gotta work fast, kid," Abe yelled over the sound of the squeegees. "This stuff sets up quick." They used specialty rollers and tools to feather the epoxy, allowing the metallic flakes to shift and create a 3-dimensional, marbled effect. It wasn't just gold. It was flowing gold, like a river of concentrated wealth. The rising tension was palpable. The neighbors, usually tucked away behind their privacy fences, were suddenly all out tending their hedges and checking their mailboxes. The whole block was on alert. Then, inevitably, the HOA struck. It was 11 o'clock a.m., and the crew was applying the second of 3 clear top coats. The driveway was already reflecting the midday sun, throwing off blinding flashes of light. Mrs. Peterson arrived, flanked by Mr. Henderson, the vice president, a man who owned 12 different pairs of khaki pants and measured his lawn to the millimeter. They stopped at the curb, their faces frozen in identical masks of horror. "Stop! Stop the work immediately!" Mrs. Peterson shrieked, actually pointing her clipboard at Abe, who just kept squeegeeing. Abe, who was paid by the hour and clearly didn't care about neighborhood drama, didn't even look up. "Can't stop, lady. This stuff cures in 6 hours. You interrupt the pour, you get a giant divot, and then you'll really have something to complain about." Mrs. Peterson turned her fury on me. "Leo Dawson! What in the name of all that is reasonable is this monstrosity?" I walked over calmly, holding the original fine notice in one hand. "It's a new hardscape, Mrs. Peterson. I believe I have fully complied with the order to remediate the stain." "Remediate? You've turned your property into a vulgar, flashing beacon!" Mr. Henderson squeaked, adjusting his glasses. "It violates the spirit of the covenants." "Ah, the spirit." I leaned in, enjoying the moment. "Let's talk covenants. Covenant Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3. Acceptable exterior color palette. What does it say, Mrs. Peterson? I memorized it, actually. It says, no neon, glow-in-the-dark, or primary colors, red, blue, yellow, that cause undue distraction. What is this, Mrs. Peterson?" I gestured grandly at the glistening gold. "It's gold. Gold, you see, is technically a metallic accent, and I'm pretty sure it's the most classic of all accents, right next to marble. It's not a primary color. It's not neon. It's an aesthetically pleasing, high-end, custom architectural finish designed for maximum durability. In fact, it's probably more durable than your own standard concrete driveway." The dialogue was a masterful game of bureaucratic chess. They sputtered, desperately searching their laminated copy of the rules for a loophole. "The glare, the reflectivity is a safety hazard," Mrs. Peterson cried, shielding her eyes dramatically. Just as the final clear coat was being applied, a new, more thrilling sound cut through the air. The distant whoop of a siren. An HOA member had called the police, claiming a public disturbance and a safety hazard, blinding light. 2 young, bewildered police officers arrived. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Miller. They looked like they'd been pulled off a shift chasing speeding elementary school buses. Officer Rodriguez eyed the driveway. "Well, I'll be. Is that metallic?" "It's a custom epoxy coating, officers," I said, walking toward them. I handed them the original fine notice, pointing to the tiny oil stain noted on the paperwork. "This all started because of this tiny $200 a day oil stain. The HOA demanded I restore the surface to its original, pristine condition. So I hired a contractor and upgraded the entire surface to a state-of-the-art, non-staining, non-violating material. These 2, I nodded toward the HOA pair, are claiming it's illegal." The cops read the fine notice, then looked at the driveway, then looked back at the tiny black mark in the picture. Officer Miller, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, just sighed, then looked at Mrs. Peterson's furious face. "Ma'am, it's certainly gold, but it's not illegal to have a shiny driveway. It's not a weapon. It's not blocking traffic. And technically, Mr. Dawson seems to have complied with the order to remediate the original issue." "But the aesthetic!" Mrs. Peterson wailed. Officer Rodriguez suppressed a laugh and leaned toward me. "Sir, I suggest you put up a little sign that says, 'Caution, extreme reflection,' just to cover your bases, but we can't cite you for a decorative surface." They left, shaking their heads, leaving the HOA to stew in their own impotence. The driveway cured. The sun hit it. It was blinding. It was glorious. It was the story's peak. I had won. The gold driveway became a local legend overnight. It was no longer just a driveway. It was a spectacle. People drove by slowly, slowing down so much they often caused small traffic jams on my usually quiet suburban street. They didn't even try to hide it. They had their phones out, snapping photos and videos. My victory quickly went viral. A neighbor's kid posted a video of the final gleaming result on TikTok with the simple caption, "HOA fined my neighbor for an oil stain, so he made his driveway worth more than their house. Hashtag petty revenge. Hashtag HOA hell. Golden driveway." The views exploded. I became an unwilling local celebrity. The media calls started flooding in. A local news crew did a drive-by segment. Coming up at 6, is this dazzling driveway art or anarchy? The whole block was divided. Some neighbors, the ones who had secret battles with the HOA over the height of their vegetable gardens or the type of mulch they used, were thrilled. They'd sneak me beers over the fence and give me a covert thumbs up. Others, the Peterson loyalists, treated me like a leper. Of course, the HOA couldn't let it go. They were desperate. They held an emergency, closed-door meeting that lasted 5 hours. I could practically hear the sound of the bylaws being frantically thumbed through. A few days later, a new, ridiculously worded violation notice arrived. This time, the charge was excessive use of reflective surface materials causing undue light pollution and deviation from neighborhood character. It came with a new, higher fine of $300 a day. I read the notice, then looked out at the gleaming expanse. My driveway was still winning, but the battle was exhausting. The continuous paperwork, the constant scrutiny, the sheer effort required to be this successfully petty was draining. My initial thought was to fight. I'd threaten to sue them for selective enforcement. I'd hire a lawyer who specialized in hardscape aesthetics. But then a different, more profitable idea occurred to me. The driveway wasn't a problem. It was a conversation starter. It was a tourist attraction. It was a feature. I called a local realtor, Ms. Sanchez, who was known for her aggressive, creative marketing. I didn't even introduce myself. I just said, "I'm the guy with the gold driveway." She gasped. "Oh my God, you're Leo! I saw you on the news! That is brilliant! I told my husband you were a genius!" I was not a genius, but I was a man who had made a very specific, very expensive point. "I'm tired of fighting, Ms. Sanchez. I want to sell the house." She showed up an hour later, stepping onto the golden surface with an expression of awe. This is unbelievable. This is going to sell in a day." She wasn't wrong. She listed the house almost immediately, and the listing featured a massive, high-resolution photo of the driveway, which she listed not as a nuisance, but as a luxury custom high-durability epoxy hardscape, a one-of-a-kind architectural feature. The listing copy focused heavily on the viral story of the HOA fine, turning the entire dispute into a selling point. The open house was a zoo. People came not to look at the quartz countertops, but to stand on the golden driveway and take pictures. The novelty, the story, and the sheer audacity of it all drove the price up. A month later, I was sitting in my realtor's office, signing the final closing papers. The house sold to a couple from out of state who thought the whole thing was hilarious and intended to keep the driveway exactly as it was. The final price was shockingly high. Ms. Sanchez had been right. The infamous, luxurious gold driveway had increased the home's value substantially as a talking point and a custom feature. I did one last calculation on a cocktail napkin. Twalcht text, final sale. Profit, hard text, cost of epoxy and labor. 22,500. Text, total fines paid. Prox, $4,000. Ads go text, tidy profit. I walked away with a significant chunk of change, all thanks to a tiny, stubborn spot of 10W30. I drove away from my old house for the last time. As I rounded the corner, I slowed down. There was Mrs. Peterson, standing on her own meticulously manicured lawn, staring across the street at my house, at her house, now owned by the people who had specifically paid extra for my beautiful, ridiculous, defiant, golden driveway. She looked utterly defeated. The gold was still gleaming, throwing a blinding ray of sunlight right into her soul. So yeah, they fined me $200 for an oil stain. I got a $250,000 björn. Profit, a story for the grandkids, and a whole new respect for industrial-grade metallic pigments. Honestly, best $20,000 I ever spent. Don't mess with a man and his tiny, harmless car trouble.